The Arizona Territory baked under a sun that offered no mercy. It was the 1870s, and the high plateau was a landscape of red rock, vast mesas sharp against a bleached sky, and canyons that sliced the earth open. Heat shimmered off the alkali flats, making the air dance and distorting the shapes of distant buttes. Dust, fine as flour and red as blood, settled on everything. It coated the tongue, gritted between the teeth, and filmed over the eyes of men and beasts alike. The smell of the air was sagebrush and dry lightning, a constant promise of violence that rarely delivered rain. Coyote Well Station was a boil on this landscape, a necessary stop hunkered down in the middle of nowhere. It was little more than a low-slung adobe building, its walls cracked and sagging, and a horse corral built of sun-warped timber. It served the stage line, offering mean whiskey, worse food, and a place to swap out exhausted horses for animals only slightly less tired. Men passed through, their faces masked by trail dust and suspicion. They spoke little, and when they did, their voices were dry rasps, worn thin by the wind. This year, the seasons were wrong. The air felt heavy, bruised. The usual dry heat had given way to a thick, oppressive humidity that clung to the skin. Clouds the color of old bruises gathered on the horizon, refusing to break, promising a deluge, a flash flood that could turn a dry arroyo into a raging, muddy river in minutes. The land was holding its breath, waiting. Inside the dim, smoky confines of the station, Evelyn Hart watched. She kept to the shadows, near a back wall where the mud chinking had fallen away, offering a sliver of the glaring outside world. She was 22 years old, though the last few months had carved lines of strain around her mouth that made her look older. She was the daughter of a failed innkeeper, a man whose quiet decency had been no match for bad luck and worse partners. Now he was gone, buried, and his ledger book, filled with red ink, was the least of her burdens. Evelyn, or Evie as her father had called her, was running. She was fleeing Silver Mercy, a town that sat like a spider in a web of its own greed, and she was fleeing a marriage. Not a marriage of love, or even convenience, but one of pure, brutal transaction. Malcolm Crane, the man who owned Silver Mercy, owned the copper mine, owned the sheriff, and owned the debt that had crushed her father, had decided she would marry his most trusted man, a mine foreman whose knuckles were scarred and whose eyes were cold chips of stone. Crane called it protection. Evie knew it was ownership. She felt the cage around her even here, miles away. It was there in the thin cotton of her dress, a pale blue garment long since faded to gray, worn thin at the elbows and torn at the hem. It was the only dress she had left that mattered. It was the dress she had been wearing when she fled, climbing out her window in the hour before dawn with nothing but a few stolen dollars and a stale loaf of bread. The dress was her prison-made manifest, a flimsy barrier against the world, yet a constant reminder of the cage she had escaped. Her hands, chapped and sore, rested in her lap. She kept them still. Her stepfather, a preacher whose piety had been a mask for a chilling cruelty, had hated restless hands. He had hated any sign of her will. His weapon had not been a fist, though she had seen that used on others. His was the quiet word, the insistent, burrowing voice that dismantled her certainty, piece by piece, until she questioned her own thoughts. He spoke of duty, of honor, of a woman's place, and every word had been a stone laid on her chest, pressing the air from her lungs. He had raised her in the shadow of spiritual abuse, convincing her that her only value lay in her submission. That voice was in her head now, whispering of sin, of recklessness, of the shame she was bringing down upon herself. She pushed the voice away, focusing on the rough tabletop, on the ring of condensation left by a tin cup. She had to keep moving. Silver Mercy was not far enough behind her, miles away, hidden where the plateau crumbled into a series of jagged canyons. A man watched the same bruised sky, His name was Kiyazi, known to most simply as Ki. He was Dine, a man of the earth, born of the red rock and the pinyon pine. He was perhaps 30 years old, though time for him was measured in seasons and sorrows, not in the ticking of a white man's clock. He was tall for his people, lean and powerful, moving with a silence that was less about stealth and more about belonging. He did not move through the landscape. He was a part of it. Ki was a scout, a trail master. He knew the paths that were not on any map, the hidden springs, the language of the hawks, the way the wind tasted before a storm. He had once scouted for the bluecoats, the soldiers, believing in a promise of peace, a bridge between two worlds. He had learned the bitterness of that lie. He had learned it during the long walk, the forced removal of his people, a scar carved across the land and across his soul. He carried his own ghosts. They walked with him in the quiet hours. He remembered his wife, her name a soft sound he no longer spoke aloud. He remembered the feel of her hands, the smell of juniper in her hair. He remembered the day she was taken, not by sickness, but by the cold, casual cruelty of displacement, a flower ripped from the only earth that could sustain her. His grief was not a loud thing. It was a weight in his chest, a stillness, a hollow place that the wind blew through. Now, he guided his own people. He led trade caravans along the old routes, protecting them from bandits, from soldiers, and from the growing encroachment of the Bilagana, the white man. His purpose was clear: protect, but do not possess. He understood, in a way the men in Silver Mercy never could, that to protect something, a person or a piece of land, did not mean you owned it. It meant you honored its right to exist, to be free. Silver Mercy was a sickness. Ki knew this. He had watched it grow, feeding off the copper ripped from the belly of Zil, the sacred mountain. He knew of Malcolm Crane, the man who saw the world only in terms of what could be dug up, bought, or broken. Crane's law was the only law in that town. It was a white man's law, written in greed and enforced with bullets, and it was choking the life from the land. The Dine had been pushed to the margins, their ancestral lands declared forfeit, their rights ignored. And now, the bluecoats from Fort Mercy were sniffing around again, edgy, their presence a constant, low-grade threat, ready to explode at the slightest provocation. Evie felt a change in the air. The low hum of conversation in the station died. A man near the door spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the hard-packed earth floor. "Riders," he announced to no one in particular. Evie's heart seized. She did not move, did not turn her head. She watched the man's reflection in the murky glass of the whiskey bottle behind the bar. One rider, two, then three, pulling up in a cloud of that relentless red dust. They were not soldiers. Their hats were low, their movements quick and rough. Silver Mercy men. She knew it in her bones. A drop of rain, fat and heavy, struck the tin roof with a loud pang. Another followed, then another. The sky, which had threatened for so long, finally tore open. It was not a gentle rain. It was a deluge, a sudden, violent release that turned the world outside the station into a gray, roaring chaos. The wind howled, rattling the poorly fitted door in its frame. In the sudden uproar, Evie saw her chance. The men were focused on the storm, on the riders shouting to get their horses under cover. The station keeper was cursing as the wind drove the rain in through the open doorway. Evie slipped out the back. There was no door. Only a heavy blanket hung over an opening, meant to keep out the sun. She pushed through it, into the maelstrom. The rain hit her like a fist, cold and shocking, plastering the thin cotton of her dress to her skin in an instant. The fabric, her cage, felt suddenly like a second, colder skin. She gasped, the breath stolen from her. She ran, not toward the road, but toward the wash, the dry riverbed that cut behind the station. It was a foolish move, and a part of her knew it. The wash would be the first place to flood. But it was cover. It was the only cover she had. From his vantage point, Key watched the storm break. He had seen the riders from Silver Mercy arrive. He knew their kind. He had been watching the station, not because of the stagecoach, but because he had tracked a stolen dine pony this far, and he suspected it was inside that corral. He saw the woman break from the back of the building. He saw her small figure, buffeted by the wind, the gray dress clinging to her. He saw her scramble down the bank into the arroyo. A flash of lightning illuminated the scene, freezing it for an instant. A woman, alone, running into the teeth of a flash flood, while 3 men dismounted at the front of the station, their purpose clear and menacing. Key cursed, a soft sound in his own language. This was not his fight. The woman was Bilagana. Her problems were not his. He had his own people to protect. His past whispered to him, reminding him of the cost of caring, the price of attachment. But he also saw the way she ran, not like someone lost, but like someone hunted. He saw the desperation, and he saw the foolishness of her path. The roar of the water was already building, a low rumble from upstream. She would be dead in minutes. He watched for another second, his face carved from the same red stone as the canyon walls. He saw one of the riders point toward the back, shouting something lost in the wind. They had seen her. Key moved. He did not think, he acted. His code was simple: protect, do not possess. And right now, that desperate, foolish woman in the torn gray dress, running toward a wall of water, needed protection. He swung onto his horse, the animal already restless from the storm, and urged him down a narrow, hidden path toward the wash. The first drops of the cleansing, chaotic rain stinging his face. The land was holding its breath no longer. The flood had begun. The mail coach smelled of axle grease, old sweat, and the sour tang of fear. Evie had paid the driver with 2 of her stolen dollars, a desperate bargain made in the twilight moments before the station at Coyote Well erupted in the storm. She had not run to the wash. She had run to the last chance, heading away from Silver Mercy, the night mail coach, and had hidden herself in the cramped, dark space of the rear boot, curled around the leather mail sacks. She had lied to the driver, told him she was meeting her husband, a story so thin it barely covered her desperation. He had taken the money, his eyes telling her he did not believe her, and he did not care. He had a schedule to keep. The coach had lurched into motion just as the first fat drops of rain began to strike the dust. For an hour, maybe 2, she was tossed about in the darkness, the wheels finding every rut and rock in the unseen road. She braced herself with her hands, her knuckles scraping against the rough wooden interior. The thin cotton of her dress, already damp from the station, felt clammy and cold. She was a piece of cargo, inanimate, running. The sound of the rain was a steady drumming, a roar that drowned out the creak of the leather suspension and the pounding of the 6-horse team. Then, a new sound cut through the storm, a shout, a gunshot. The coach slammed to a halt, throwing Evie hard against the forward wall of the boot. She heard the driver curse, his voice high and tight with panic. Another shot, this one closer, splintering wood. The coach rocked violently as a man's heavy boots landed on the roof. "He's in the boot," a voice roared, muffled by the storm and the thick timber. "Crane wants her back alive, you fools." Panic, cold and absolute, seized Evie. They knew. Crane's men, they had found her. She heard the metallic scrape of the latch. A different sound, high and thin, pierced the night. It was a cry that was not human, a sharp, whistling shriek that echoed off the unseen canyon walls. It was followed by the crack of a different rifle. Not the heavy boom of the bandits' carbines, but a sharper, faster report. The man on the roof shouted, "What in hell was that?" "It's just the wind. Get the girl." But the diversion had come. The driver, seeing his chance, laid the whip to the horses. The team lunged, panicked by the gunshots and the strange cry. The coach leaped forward, uncontrolled, careening off the road. The man on the roof was thrown clear, screaming a curse into the rain. Evie was tossed like a rag doll. She heard the other riders shouting, galloping hard to catch the runaway coach. They were no longer trying to stop it gently. They were firing. The bullets thudding into the back of the coach. One tore through the wood near her head, filling the air with the smell of scorched pine. She was going to die. She was going to die in a box, on a dark road, killed by the men sent to rescue her. Kiyazi had been tracking the stolen pony for 2 days. He had found its trail leading, as he expected, toward the white man's station. He had been moving parallel to the mail road, a mile to the north, using the ridges for cover when he saw the ambush. He knew the men. He knew their hats, the way they sat their horses. Silver Mercy men, Crane's men. He was too far away to stop them, and it was not his fight. He had repeated the words to himself. Not his fight, but he had seen them trap the coach, and he had seen the man climb on top, heading for the rear boot. He had heard the faint shout, "Crane wants her back." A woman. His own ghosts had risen up then, whispering of another woman, another time, another moment of brutal capture. He had raised his rifle, not aiming at the men. He sighted on a flat rock face high above them, a place that would send an echo. He fired. Then he put his fingers to his lips and gave the piercing cry of the red-tailed hawk. A sound meant to turn a man's blood cold, to make him look up, to make him question the night. He had not expected the driver to bolt. He had not expected the coach to careen wildly off the main track, plunging straight toward the wide, shallow mouth of the arroyo, and he had not expected the sound that came next. It was not a sound. At first, it was a vibration in the ground, a deep, shuddering rumble that he felt in the bones of his horse. Upstream, the rain, which had been a steady downpour, had become a cloudburst over the high mesas. The flash flood. "Hiya!" Key yelled, kicking his horse, racing it not toward the coach, but toward the high ground on the far side of the arroyo, trying to cut off the runaway team, to turn them before they reached the main channel. The bandits, blinded by the rain and their pursuit, followed the coach into the wash. They thought it was a dry run, a shallow dip. They did not feel the shudder. They did not hear the rumble beneath the roar of the rain. Evie felt the wheels leave the road. She felt the sickening drop as the coach tilted, one side plunging down. Wood screamed and splintered. The coach hit the bottom of the wash, bounced once, and then the world exploded. A wall of water, mud, and debris struck the coach broadside. It was not water as she knew it. It was a grinding, churning, liquid earth, filled with uprooted trees and rolling boulders. The coach disintegrated. The boot was ripped open, and Evie was thrown, sucked under, tumbled in the freezing, suffocating mud. She fought, her lungs burning. She did not know which way was up. The cold was a shock that stole her breath. Her torn dress, her cage, wrapped around her legs, pulling her down. She clawed, her hand finding something solid, a piece of the shattered coach. She clung to it, her head breaking the surface. She gasped, spitting out filthy water. The world was a nightmare of roaring water and lashing rain. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the chaos. The arroyo was a river, 10 feet deep and rising, churning with the wreckage of the coach and the bodies of horses. She saw one of the bandits, his arms flailing, swept past her and slammed into a rock. He did not move again. Then she saw the other man, the Indian. He was the source of the hawk cry. He was on a strong pinto, fighting the edge of the current. He had been trying to get to her, or perhaps to the horses. But the edge of the flood was a trap, a thick, sucking mud that was worse than the current. His horse had stepped wrong, its front legs sinking deep into the slurry. The animal screamed, a sound of pure terror, fighting the mud, sinking deeper with every struggle. Key was off the horse in an instant, pushing at its shoulders, speaking to it in low, urgent tones, his words lost in the storm. He was trying to get the animal to roll, to find purchase, but the mud had it. The horse was going to die, and the man would be trapped with it. Evie was still clinging to her piece of wreckage, which had lodged against a half-submerged boulder. She was only 20 feet from him. She saw his struggle. She saw the horse's wide, terrified eyes. She saw the man, soaked and straining, refuse to leave the animal. She looked around, her mind working with a strange, cold clarity. A long leather strap, part of the coach's harnessing, was floating past her, tangled in a broken piece of the frame. She grabbed it. It was thick, strong. "Here!" she screamed. Her voice was a thin reed in the storm. He did not hear her. He was trying to dig the mud away from the horse's legs with his bare hands. She would not let that horse die. She would not watch another living thing be swallowed by this land. She let go of her refuge, the boulder, and plunged into the chest-deep, swirling water. It was a stupid, suicidal move. The current grabbed her, but she was braced. She was the daughter of an innkeeper. Yes, but she had also pulled more than one drunken, drowning fool from the town's horse trough. She knew leverage. She fought her way to the bank, the mud sucking at her boots. She was closer now. "Take it!" she shouted, throwing the end of the leather strap toward him. It fell short. "Again!" she yelled, pulling it back, her feet sinking. Key looked up. He saw her, this white woman, half drowned, her face streaked with mud, her dress in tatters. She was not screaming for help. She was offering it. She threw the strap again. This time, he caught it. He looked at it, then at her. He understood. He wrapped the strap around his hands, wedged himself against the horse's heaving flank, and used it as a brace, pulling back, giving the animal a solid point to fight against. "Now!" Evie shrieked, finding a strength she did not know she possessed. She pulled on her end, not with much strength, but just enough to keep the line taut. It was the horse that did the work, feeling the steady, unyielding pull. The animal gave a desperate, heaving lurch, found purchase with its hind legs, and scrambled free of the mud, lunging onto the bank and shaking with terror. Key was free, but the water was rising, lapping at the bank where they stood. The main current was a monster, and they were on the wrong side. He grabbed the Pinto's reins, his face a mask of stone. He owed this woman his horse. He owed her his life. He turned to her. The lightning flashed again, and in that stark, blue-white light, he saw her arm. She was pushing her wet, matted hair from her face, and the sleeve of her dress had been torn away. High on her upper arm, just below the shoulder, was a bruise. It was old, a sickly, mottled map of yellow and purple and green, in the distinct, unmistakable shape of a man's hand, the fingers pressed deep into her flesh. It was not a bruise from the wreck. It was old. It was the mark of ownership. He said nothing. The question, "Who did this to you?" stayed behind his teeth. It was not his to ask. The water surged, cutting the bank away from under their feet. Key grabbed her arm, the one without the bruise, and pulled her toward the rock face behind them. "Up!" he commanded, his voice the first thing she had heard from him. It was deep and rough, like the stones themselves. He pushed her, half carrying her, scrambling up the slick rock, looking for any refuge. He found it, a shallow overhang, a hollowed-out space in the cliff face, barely a cave. But it was above the water. He shoved her inside, and his horse, following its master, pressed close, seeking shelter against the rock. They were trapped. The flood roared past, a churning river in the blackness, illuminated by the stuttering flashes of lightning. They were soaked, shivering, and marooned in a tiny rock cavity. A man and a woman who were enemies by every law of this land, bound by a storm and a saved horse. Evie huddled at the back of the shelter, her body shaking so hard her teeth ached. The cold was unbearable. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stop the tremors. A shape washed up at the edge of the rising water, 20 feet below their refuge. It was one of the bandits, face down in the mud. As she watched, a wave of debris rolled him over. A leather satchel, slung across his chest, was ripped open. A small, oilskin-wrapped book fell out, lodging against a rock. Key was watching the water, his attention on the opposite bank, looking for any sign of the other attackers. He did not see the book. Evie did. She watched it, her eyes narrow. That was the man who had been at the boot, the one who knew her name. The storm raged for what felt like hours. The water peaked, swirling just a few feet below them. Then, as slowly as it had risen, it began to recede. The rain softened, turning from a deluge to a steady, cold drizzle. In the first gray light of a drowned dawn, the arroyo was a sea of mud, wreckage, and death. The bodies of 2 bandits and 4 horses were visible, half buried in the silt. Evie was numb. The cold had seeped into her bones. She had survived. Key had not moved. He stood near the mouth of the alcove, a silent, watchful sentinel. He had taken a wool blanket, tightly rolled and wrapped in oilskin, from his horse's saddle pack. He had not offered it to her. Now, he turned. He looked at her, his dark eyes assessing, unreadable. He saw the shivering, the pale, chapped lips, the torn dress. Evie stared back. She was alive, and she was still a prisoner. This man, her savior, was dying. A Navajo. She knew the stories, the whispered fears of the women in Silver Mercy. Savage, kidnapper, killer. But she also knew the handprint on her arm. She knew the cold eyes of the foreman. She knew the voice of her stepfather. She had run from one cage, only to find herself in another. She had to choose. She pushed herself away from the wall, her limbs stiff and sore. She slid down the rock face, her waterlogged boots hitting the sucking mud. She walked, her legs shaking, to the place where the bandit had washed up. The book was still there, wedged against the rock, coated in slime. She picked it up. She wiped it on the ruined fabric of her skirt and shoved it deep into the pocket, a small, hard square against her thigh. Key watched her. He did not move, did not speak. She walked back, standing before him. She was smaller than him, but she did not look down. She looked him directly in the eye. "They will come looking for me," she said, her voice a hoarse croak. "The men from Silver Mercy." He nodded once. "I know." "They will say you took me," she said, the words flat, hard. "They will say you kidnapped me." "I know," he said again. "I will not go back," she said. It was not a plea. It was a statement of fact. She would die here in this mud before she went back. "Do not take me back to Silver Mercy." Key looked at her for a long time. The silence stretched, broken only by the drip of water from the rocks and the mournful sigh of the wind. He saw the terror in her, but he also saw the iron, the thing that had made her save his horse when she should have been saving herself. He looked at the torn dress, and he thought of the bruise he had seen. He untied the blanket roll from his saddle. He did not hand it to her. He shook it out, a thick, woven blanket, rich with the colors of the earth, red and black and gray. He draped it over her shoulders. It was heavy and warm, and smelled faintly of wood smoke and sage. It was the first warmth she had felt in days. "I do not take," he said, his voice low. "I am a guide. Where you go is your decision, but I will not lead you back to that town." Evie pulled the blanket tighter, the coarse wool a comfort against her cold skin. She had traded one set of rules for another, in a world she did not understand. But the man before her had not tried to own her. He had simply given her a choice. "Where will you go?" he asked. "North," she said, though she had no idea what was north. "To Cedar Bluff. I need to get to Cedar Bluff." "That is a hard trail," he said. He looked at the sky, at the broken land. "And we have no food, and no horses for you. The men from Silver Mercy will be back when the water drops." "Then we should not be here when they come," she said. Key looked at her, a flicker of something, perhaps respect, in his dark eyes. He nodded. We will walk. I know a place. A hogan. My aunt lives there. It is safe. He turned to his horse. We will be seen, but we will walk. The news hit Silver Mercy like a shovelful of hot slag. It came in on the back of a half-drowned horse, ridden by the lone survivor of the ambush, a man named Taggart. He was one of Malcolm Crane's men, and he staggered into the assay office, dripping muddy water, his face gray with shock. Malcolm Crane listened without moving. He was a man built of solid, prosperous angles, his vest straining slightly over a stomach that spoke of good whiskey and thick steaks. His office was the only two-story building in town, and from its window, he could see the gaping maw of his copper mine, the place that made him a king. Gone, Taggart repeated, his voice shaking. The coach, the team, everything, swept away. And Boone's men, Jed and Samples, they're gone too. And the girl, Crane's voice was flat, cold as bedrock. She was in the boot, Mr. Crane, just like you said. But the water, I saw a Navajo, a single warrior. He caused it. He fired on us, spooked the team right into the wash just as the flood hit. He must have taken her. He must have known she was there. Crane's heavy fist came down on his oak desk. The inkwell jumped. Boone! He roared. The door to the inner office opened, and Boone stepped out. He was the man Evie Hart was supposed to marry. He was the mine foreman, a man whose size was his primary argument. He had a thick neck, shoulders that strained his suspenders, and a face that was a map of small violences. His hands were huge, the knuckles scarred. You heard him, Crane said, his face mottling with rage. He lost my coach, my mail contract, and he lost my property. Boone's eyes, small and cold, fixed on Taggart. A Navajo, you say? I think so, Taggart stammered. He shot from the ridge, made a sound, like a hawk. Boone almost smiled. Ki Yazi, he said, the name sounding rough in his mouth. That Dine scout. He's been a thorn in our side for a year, guiding those trade runs, thinks he owns the high trails. He looked at Crane. So, he has the girl. I do not care who has her, Crane snapped. I want her back. She made a fool of me. She made a fool of you. Boone, she ran, and she took something of mine with her. He did not mean the small book of ledgers, which he had not yet missed. He meant her, the principal. Get a posse. Crane commanded. Take who you need from the mine. I want her back, and I want that redskin's scalp. I am posting a $100 reward for the return of Evelyn Hart, and another $50 for the man who brings her abductor in. He'll be on foot, Boone said, his mind already working, ignoring the half-drowned Taggart. The wash took everything. He'll head for the high country. He'll head for the Hogans. He turned and walked out of the office, his heavy boots shaking the floorboards. He was a hunter, and the prey had been named. Within an hour, Boone was riding out of Silver Mercy at the head of a dozen men. They were not lawmen. They were shift bosses, pit enforcers, and saloon scrapers, men who worked for Crane's coin and asked no questions. They were heavily armed, and they rode with the grim purpose of men who had been promised a bounty and a release. The news spread faster than the posse. A telegraph wire, humming with Crane's message, carried the story to Fort Mercy. The captain at the fort, a young man from the east who was anxious to prove his worth against a foe, read the dispatch. A white woman, he said to his lieutenant, abducted from a mail coach by a Navajo warrior, ripped from the protection of her fiancé, Mr. Boone. The captain saw his chance for a commendation. This is an outrage. This is what we are here to prevent. Ready a patrol. Lieutenant, 20 men. We ride at once. We will rescue Miss Hart and restore order. We will show these savages the meaning of United States law. The rumor, now given the polished boot of military authority, became fact. The story of Evie's flight, her desperation, her choice, was erased. In its place was a simpler, Older Tale, the Savage and the Captive. The ground was a ruin. The sun beat down, turning the leagues of mud into a steaming, stinking mire. Evie's feet were on fire. The thin leather boots she had fled in, soaked and then dried by the arid air, had shrunk. They were no longer boots. They were instruments of torture. With every step, the hard, shrunken leather rubbed her heels, her toes, her ankles, raw. She did not cry out. She bit her lip and kept walking. The heavy wool blanket Key had given her a suffocating weight in the heat, but a necessary shield against the sun. Key walked ahead of her, leading the pinto. He moved with an economy of motion that she envied. He did not seem to be walking so much as flowing over the broken ground. He had not spoken more than 2 words to her since they had climbed out of the arroyo, save to point to a cluster of broad-leafed plants and say, "Do not eat. Poison." She stumbled, a sharp cry of pain escaping her before she could stop it. The blister on her left heel had finally broken. A jolt of liquid fire shooting up her leg. She fell to one knee, the rough fabric of the blanket scraping the mud. Key stopped. He turned, his face impassive, and watched her. He had known this was coming. He had seen her limping for the last mile, the small, tight line of pain around her mouth. I am all right," she said, her voice choked with humiliation. She tried to stand, but the pain was too much. He walked back to her. He did not offer a hand. He simply stood over her, a tall, silent figure against the glaring sky. "Your feet," he said. It was not a question. She nodded, refusing to meet his eyes. She felt the hot sting of tears, not from the pain, but from the frustration. She was so weak. "We cannot stop here," he said. "They will track us to the wash. They will follow the mud." He looked at her ruined boots. "You cannot walk in those." She looked up, defiant. "I will not be carried." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, so faint she thought she might have imagined it. "I know, my aunt, Sha'a. She lives near here, in the high rocks." "A Hogan. She is a healer. She will have moccasins. She will have medicine for your feet." Evie looked at him, suspicion warring with her desperate need. A healer. A Hogan. It sounded foreign, dangerous. But then, so did Silver Mercy. So did the man leading the posse, the man she was supposed to call husband. "I am not going back," she repeated, the words a desperate creed. "I am going to Cedar Bluff. I need to find work. I need to start over." "This is on the way to the high trail," Key said. "The trail to Cedar Bluff. You will be safe there. She will help." Evie made her decision. She gripped the pinto's stirrup and pulled herself up, her teeth grinding against the pain. "Then let us go." They walked for another hour, Key slowing his pace, picking a path over flat stones where he could, to spare her feet. When the sun was at its highest, he stopped in the meager shade of a high pinnacle of rock. He motioned for her to sit. She sank to the ground, the relief so profound it was almost painful. She leaned her head back against the hot stone, closing her eyes. She had to take the boots off. She knew it. She fumbled with the wet, stiff laces, her fingers clumsy and sore. As she pulled the boot off her left foot, she had to stifle a sob. Her sock, her thin cotton stocking, was soaked in blood. The skin of her heel was gone. She reached for her other boot, and as she did, she adjusted her skirt. The movement exposed, for just a second, the top of her right boot. Tucked inside was a small knife, a paring knife she had stolen from the kitchen in Silver Mercy. It was a pathetic weapon, but it was all she had. She saw him see it, his eyes sharp as a hawk's. Flicked to the handle, then back to her face. Evie froze. She expected anger, a demand, a threat. He was an Indian. She had a knife. The calculations were simple, stark, and terrifying. Key held her gaze for a long moment. He said nothing about the knife. He did not accuse, he did not demand, he simply acknowledged what he saw. He stood up, went to his pinto, and unslung a second water canteen from the saddle. He walked back and offered it to her. "This is yours," he said. "The water in this land is a trick. You will drink when I say, do not sip to save it. When we have water, we drink deep. When we do not, we remember the last drink." She took the canteen. Her hand was shaking. This simple act of trust, of giving her water instead of taking her knife, undid her more than any threat could have. He turned his back to her, giving her privacy to tend to her feet. He looked out over the land, his body at rest but his eyes in constant motion. He pointed, not at her, but toward the north, at the great blue shadow of a mountain that dominated the horizon. "That is Zil," he said, his voice quiet, conversational. "It is a mountain," Evie said, her voice small, as she wrapped a strip of cloth torn from her petticoat around her bloody heel. "It is Dzil," he repeated. "It is the sacred mountain. My people were born from this land, between the 4 mountains. This is our home. The trails we walk, they are not just paths to get from one place to another, they are stories. My grandfather's grandfather walked this trail, to hunt, to trade, to pray. When I walk here, I am not alone. He walks with me." Evie stopped, her hands still. She listened. She had never heard anyone speak of the land this way. To her, to the people of Silver Mercy, the land was something to be broken, to be dug up, to be survived. It was an enemy, or a resource. To him, it was a relative. "Crane, the man in Silver Mercy," she said, her voice low. "He is digging into that mountain, for copper." Key's back stiffened, but he did not turn. "I know what he does. He is a man who eats his own mother. He does not see, he only takes." He turned back to her. His face was hard, the mask back in place. "Rest, we move in a few minutes. Shah is waiting." Miles behind them. Boone knelt in the mud of the arroyo. He examined the tracks, the churned earth where Key's horse had been trapped, the small, desperate prints of Evie's boots. He saw where they had scrambled up the bank, where they had waited in the rock hollow. "He's good," Boone said, a grudging respect in his voice. "He saved his horse, and she saved him." He had pieced together the story from the tracks, the bit of leather harness Evie had used left tangled in the mud. "Mr. Boone," one of his men said, pointing. "Look." He had found the body of Jed, half buried, his pistol still in his holster. Nearby, he found the oilskin book, the one Evie had taken. No, not that one. This was another, Jed's book. Boone ignored it. "He's on foot," Boone said, standing up and wiping the mud from his hands. "He and the girl, he's heading for the high country. He'll aim for the Sosola Spring. It's the only clean water for 30 miles in that direction." He turned to one of his riders, a thin, weasel-faced man named Pike. "Pike, you ride ahead. You know the springs. Get there first. Wait for them. You do not have to take them. Just leave a message. Let them know we are coming. And leave them nothing to drink." Pike smiled, a nasty baring of yellow teeth. "Foul the water. Got it." "The rest of you," Boone said, "ride back to the territory line. Split up. Tell every man you meet, every bounty hunter, every drunk with a rifle, that the reward is doubled. Tell them $200 for the girl, and another $100 for the Navajo, dead or alive. I want this whole territory crawling with hunters. I want him to have nowhere to run, nowhere to hide." Boone mounted his horse. He looked at the tracks leading away from the wash. He was not just hunting a man and a woman. He was starting a war. The rumor, Unleashed, took on a life of its own. It rode faster than any horse, in Coyote Well. The station master told a group of prospectors. In the saloons of Prescott, it was told over whiskey. At Fort Mercy, the cavalry patrol rode out, their sabers jingling, on a righteous crusade. The story was simple, and it was potent. A good Christian woman, Evelyn Hart, stolen by a godless savage. She was a prize, a victim, a symbol, her own choice. The desperate, brave, foolish act of a woman claiming her own life was buried, lost under the mud of the flash flood and the roar of men's voices. Evelyn Hart was gone. In her place was only the white girl, and the hunt was on. They reached the Hogan just as the merciless sun began to bleed into the western sky, painting the high cliffs in shades of apricot and blood. The last mile had been a blur of agony for Evie. She had walked on raw flesh, her mind detached from the pain, focusing only on the steady, silent back of the man in front of her. The Hogan was not a building, not in the way she understood the word. It was a dwelling that seemed to have been sung up from the earth itself. It was round, built of heavy timbers and packed earth, its door facing the east, toward the rising sun. It sat in a sheltered cleft of rock, nearly invisible until they were upon it. A wisp of juniper smoke, blue and fragrant, rose from the smoke hole in the roof, a sign of life, of sanctuary. A woman emerged as they approached. She was old, her face a beautiful, intricate map of wrinkles, her eyes as dark and deep as a night sky. She wore her graying hair tied back in a traditional bun, and her skirt was the color of the earth, her blouse a deep, rich purple. This was Shah. She looked first at Key, her nephew, and a conversation passed between them in a series of looks and a few low words in their own language. Then, the old woman's gaze fell on Evie. She took in the ruined dress, the matted hair, the way Evie held herself, braced against pain. She saw the heavy wool blanket, Key's blanket, draped over her shoulders. She nodded slowly, an acceptance. "She is hurt," Key said in English, for Evie's benefit. "I see the hurt," Shah replied, her voice a low, soft rasp. "I see the tracks she leaves. Bring her inside. The air grows teeth when the sun dies." Inside, the Hogan was a single, round room. Surprisingly spacious. The air was warm, filled with the scent of the juniper fire that smoldered in the central pit. Sheepskins were piled against the walls for sleeping, and woven sacks of corn, beans, and dried herbs hung from the timbered ceiling. It was a place of order, of peace. Shah motioned for Evie to sit on a soft sheepskin. "Your feet," she commanded, not unkindly. Evie's hands trembled as she unwrapped the bloody rags she had tied around her heels. The sight of her own flesh, raw and broken, made her stomach turn. Shah examined the wounds without wincing. She clicked her tongue, a sound of mild disapproval, as if at a problem that should have been tended to sooner. She went to a corner and returned with a clay bowl filled with a dark, pungent salve and a handful of soft, dried moss. "This will sting," she said. She did not wait for an answer. Her hands were strong, her touch firm as she cleaned the wounds with a clean, wet cloth, and then applied the salve. It did sting. It felt like fire, a clean, burning fire that seemed to be searing the infection away. Evie hissed, her knuckles white, but she did not pull away. After the salve, Shah packed the wounds with the soft, springy moss, which felt miraculously cool, and then bound her feet in strips of clean, soft buckskin. "You will not walk on these for 2 days," the old woman stated. "We cannot stay 2 days," Key said from the doorway, where he stood watching the last of the light fade. "Boone is coming, the man from the mine. He will have a posse." "Boone," Shah said, the name tasting like poison. "He is a man who breaks what he cannot understand." She looked at Evie. "Then we will do what we can tonight." Later, after they had eaten a simple, nourishing stew of corn and rabbit, Shah brought out a small, flat bundle of dried juniper and sage. She placed it on the hot coals of the fire. A thick, aromatic smoke rose, filling the Hogan. Stand in it, she said to Evie. Let it cover you. Evie, confused, did as she was told. She stood over the smoldering herbs, the smoke rising, clinging to her, enveloping her in its sharp, clean perfume. It was in her hair, on her skin, in the tattered threads of her dress. The trail has been hard, Shah said, her voice a low chant. You carry the dust of fear. You carry the smell of the flood. You carry the handprint of a man who is not your husband. Evie flinched, her eyes flying to the old woman's face. How could she know? I am a healer, Shah said simply. I see more than the skin. The smoke cleanses. It reminds you that you are here, now. The water did not take you. The men did not hold you. You are here. Evie closed her eyes, and for the first time since she had climbed out her window in Silver Mercy, she felt a single, small seed of safety. She felt the cage of her stepfather's voice, the cold terror of Boone's pursuit, begin to recede, if only by a fraction. When she opened her eyes, the old woman was holding out a pair of soft, high-topped moccasins, beautifully stitched and beaded with small, blue stones. These were my daughters, she said. She is with the stars now. They will fit you, your boots. They are a prison for your feet. You cannot walk the high trail in a prison. Evie took them, her hands trembling. The leather was soft as butter. I cannot. I have nothing to pay you. Payment is a white man's word, Shah said. You will learn to tie them. They are your connection to the earth. You will feel the ground. You will listen to it, and it will tell you who else walks upon it. That night, Evie slept, a deep, exhausted, dreamless sleep, wrapped in Key's blanket. Key did not sleep. He sat near the Hogan's entrance, his rifle across his knees. Listening to the night sounds, his senses stretched out into the darkness. On the second day, a small boy, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, came into the Hogan. He was Shah's grandson, his parents away with the sheep herds. He was a bright, curious child, but his breathing was a constant, strained whistle. Evie watched him, her brow furrowed. She recognized the sound. In the inn. She had tended to all manner of sickness, from gunshot wounds to miner's lung. She had seen this before. The boy, playing near the fire, suddenly began to cough, a dry, racking sound that shook his small frame. His eyes went wide with panic as his breath shortened, the whistling sound becoming a high-pitched, desperate gasp. Shah rushed to him, patting his back, speaking to him in soothing Dine, but the attack was getting worse. The boy's face was turning pale, a blue tinge around his lips. It is his lungs, Shah said, her own voice tight with fear. The smoke. Sometimes the smoke is bad for him. Asthma, Evie said, the word a sharp command. She was no longer the victim, the refugee. She was the innkeeper's daughter, the one who knew what to do when the world was falling apart. Get me hot water, a bowl of it, and a towel, quickly, and open the door flap. He needs air, not smoke, clear air. Shah, startled by her sudden authority, moved without question. Key, who had come inside at the sound of the coughing, immediately pulled back the heavy blanket covering the doorway, letting the cool, clean morning air flood the Hogan. Evie took the bowl of steaming water from Shah. She knelt in front of the child. I know this is frightening, she said, her voice low and steady, the voice she used for panicked horses and drunken men. But you must breathe with me. Look at me. She held the bowl, letting the steam rise, and draped the towel over his head and the bowl, creating a small tent. Breathe the steam, she commanded. Slowly. In. Out. She made him listen to her own breathing. A calm, steady rhythm. She held his small, cold hand. It is all right, she murmured. The air is just tight. We are going to loosen it. You are strong. You are a warrior. Breathe with me. It took 10 minutes. 10 minutes of Evie's steady voice, the life-giving steam, and the child's panicked sobs slowly subsiding into ragged, deeper breaths. The whistling faded. The color returned to his cheeks. Finally, he sagged against her, exhausted, but breathing. Evie held him, her own body trembling from the adrenaline. She had done this. She had helped. Shah knelt beside her, her hand resting on Evie's shoulder. She said nothing, but her eyes, deep and knowing, spoke a volume of gratitude. Key watched from the doorway, his face unreadable, but his gaze lingered on her. He had seen a new part of her, not the survivor, but the healer. The peace was broken an hour later. A young Dine man on a lathered pony rode up, his face grim. He spoke urgently to Key. Key's body went rigid. He turned to Shah and Evie. A rider. He was at Sosola Spring. Pike, one of Boone's men. He did not wait for us. He left a dead coyote in the spring, poisoning the water. He is telling all the bounty hunters that the reward for Evie is $200. Evie felt the cold return. He knew we would go there. Key knew he would go there. Key corrected, his voice hard. This is a message. Boone is not just following. He is herding us, and he is turning every desperate man in this territory into a hunter. Shah's face was grim. You must leave, now. You cannot stay here. You bring his anger to my home. The words, though true, struck Evie like a slap. Guilt, sharp and bitter, flooded her. She was a plague. She was bringing this danger to the people who had helped her. I am sorry, she whispered, her voice thick. I will go alone. You will not, Key said. Alone. You are dead in one day. You do not know the land. And with you, I am a target, she countered, her voice rising. They want you because of me. They want me because I am Dine, Key said, his voice a cold lash. They want you because you are a woman they think they own. We are targets for different reasons, but we are targets together. We go now. Shah nodded, accepting the brutal logic. She hurried inside the hogan. Evie, her new moccasins tied, her heart a cold stone in her chest, followed. She was ashamed, guilty, and terrified. As they prepared to leave, Key strapping the water canteens to the pinto. Shah stopped Evie. She held out a bundle. It was not the heavy, dark blanket Key had given her. It was a shawl, woven with breathtaking skill. It was lighter, softer, the colors of the high desert at dawn, deep blues, pale golds, and a streak of vibrant, defiant red. My nephew's blanket is for warmth. Shah said, it is a man's protection. This is a woman's. It is a story. It will not hide you. It will not make you invisible. It is to be worn when you choose to be seen. When you choose your own path, it is for the woman who breathes for the child. Protection you choose, not protection that is forced on you. Evie took the shawl, the wool soft against her scraped hands. She wrapped it around her shoulders, over the tattered dress. It felt like a shield, but a light one. It felt like a promise. Thank you, she whispered, the words inadequate. Key led the way, his pinto carrying their meager supplies. They did not talk. The silence was heavy, filled with the things unsaid. Evie walked beside him, her feet, blessedly, no longer in agony. The moccasins were strange. She could feel every pebble, every twig, but it was a feeling, not a pain. Key stopped. He knelt, pointing to a scrape in the dust, a small pile of disturbed pebbles. Ground squirrel, he said. His tracks. He is fast, but he is careless. He tells everyone where he is going. Evie looked, seeing nothing but dirt. Look at the way the wind blows the dust, he said, his voice low, instructive. It blows from the north. The air is cooler. The rain is gone. For now, the smell, you smell that, The pine, it means we are close to the high rock. The wind is your map. The smell is your map. He was teaching her. In the midst of their flight, he was teaching her to read the desert. He showed her how to find water by following the line of cottonwoods, how to tell a fresh track from an old one. It was practical, it was real, and it was the first knowledge she had ever been given that was not from a book. That was not about how to please a man or run an inn. It was about how to live. As the day wore on, a new, tentative feeling grew between them. It was not friendship. It was the silence of two people who understood, without words, the stakes. It was the safety of knowing the person next to you was as alert, as focused as you were. When they rounded a narrow, exposed cliff, Evie noticed he put himself on the outside, his body between her and the sheer drop, and also between her and the prevailing wind. He did not mention it. It was simply done. As dusk approached, he pointed to a narrow cleft in the rock face, a crack so thin it looked impossible to pass. "The slot canyon. It is the only way through the mesa. It will be dark. We must be through by dawn." They entered the canyon. The walls rose hundreds of feet, smooth, water-carved sandstone that glowed red in the fading light. The path was barely wide enough for the horse. It was silent, the air still and cold. An hour into the canyon, Key suddenly stopped. He held up a hand. Evie froze, her heart hammering. He knelt, his head low to the ground, looking ahead in the near-total darkness. He touched the sand, then sifted it through his fingers. He moved forward, slowly, and knelt again. He motioned for her to come. "What is it?" she whispered. He did not answer. He pointed, at his feet. He had crumbled a piece of the soft sandstone, creating a small patch of fine, light-colored powder. In the middle of that powder was a single, clear footprint, a boot, a heavy, white man's boot. It was fresh. "They are not behind us," Key whispered, his voice deadly. "They are in front." He looked up, his eyes scanning the rim of the canyon. Hundreds of feet above. A trap. Boone had not just poisoned the spring. He had outguessed them. Evie looked at the single boot print, stark in Key's circle of pale dust. It was a mirror, reflecting their doom. They were caught. "There is a rendezvous point," Key said, his voice so low she could barely hear him. "A trader, a man I know. He is supposed to have horses. It is just past the mouth of this canyon. He is a good man. He will help us." He looked at the boot print again, and a shadow of doubt crossed his face. He should be there. They pushed on, Key now moving with an urgent, dangerous silence. When they reached the mouth of the canyon, they saw a single, low fire burning in a circle of rocks. A man was there, silhouetted against the flames. "Key," the man called out, his voice friendly. "You made it. I have the horses. 2 good ones. Just like you asked." Evie felt a rush of relief. They were safe. Key did not move. His hand rested on the stock of his rifle. He did not step out of the shadow of the canyon. "He is too loud," Key whispered. "His fire is too big. He is telling everyone where he is." And as Evie watched, a second shadow detached itself from the rocks behind the friendly trader. And a third. The fire was not a beacon of help. It was a lure. The rendezvous was a trap. The fire was a lure. The voice was a lie. Key's hand clamped on Evie's shoulder, not in comfort, but in warning, pushing her back into the deepest shadow of the slot canyon. The pinto, trained to a whisper, stood like a stone. The 2 men who had stepped from the rocks near the fire were not traders. They were hard cases, their gun belts heavy, their eyes scanning the darkness where Key and Evie hid. The friendly trader kept his hands high and away from his body, his face slick with sweat. "He ain't here, Pike," the trader said, his voice a nervous whine. "I told you, Key's smart. He smelled it. He smelled you." The man named Pike, the same weasel-faced man who had poisoned the spring, spat into the fire. The flames hissed. "He's here. He's just waiting. And he's got $200 of Crane's money on his head. And the girl." "What we doing, Pike?" the other man asked, his rifle held ready. "We wait," Pike said. "He's trapped. Boone's main posse is coming up the South Ridge. The cavalry sweeping the flats. This canyon is the only way north. He's in the bottle, and we're the cork." A new voice, smooth and amused, came from the rocks above them. "Well now, Pike, that's a fine-looking plan, but you've got one small problem." Everyone froze. Pike and his man spun around, their rifles coming up, searching the darkness of the cliffs. Evie's heart hammered against her ribs. "Who's there?" Pike yelled. "Just a man who appreciates a good fire," the voice drawled. "The problem, you see, is that you're the cork, but I'm the one holding the bottle, and I don't much like you." A single shot rang out. It wasn't loud, but precise. The rifle in Pike's hand spun, clattering to the rocks. Pike screamed, clutching a hand that was suddenly missing a finger. "Jesus!" the other man yelled, firing blind into the rocks. "Bad manners," the voice from above said, disappointed. A second shot. The second man's rifle was also torn from his grasp. "Now," the voice said, "I suggest you two take your friend, the one who talks too loud, and you walk east. Do not look back. If I see you again, I'll be aiming for things you're much more fond of than your fingers." Pike, whimpering, his hand wrapped in a bandana, needed no more convincing. He and the other man grabbed the terrified trader and stumbled off into the darkness, running. Silence, heavy and absolute, returned. "You can come out now, Ki-Yazi," the voice said, closer now. "It's been a long time, and you've brought a friend." Ki did not move for a full minute. He listened. Finally, he stepped from the shadows, his hand still on his rifle. Evie, clutching the Pinto's reins, followed, her eyes straining to see their newest savior. The man dropped from the rocks as lightly as a cat. He was not tall, but he had a presence. He wore a fine, if dusty, coat and a hat that was tilted with a certain arrogance. He was smiling, and in the low light of the fire, Evie saw that his eyes were a startling, pale gray. "Rafe Calder," Ki said. His voice was flat, acknowledging, not welcoming. "In the flesh," the man said, sweeping his hat off in a mocking bow to Evie. "Ma'am, my apologies for the rough welcome. My associates are enthusiastic, but not bright." "Those were not your associates," Ki said. "Those were bounty hunters. Pike is Boone's man." "True," Rafe Calder agreed, poking the fire with the toe of his boot. "But a man can't be picky about his business partners in this territory. I'm a trader. I trade in information. I heard there was a high-dollar bounty on a certain Navajo scout and the girl he'd stolen. I knew it had to be you, and I knew Boone would try to cork this canyon. So I got here first. I owed you that." "You owed me," Evie whispered. Ki's eyes never left Rafe's face. 4 winters ago, the blizzard at 3 Peaks. He was unable to help himself." Rafe laughed, a genuine, charming sound. "He means I was half frozen, half drunk, and had a bullet in my leg. Ki dragged me 3 miles on a hide sled to a warm cave and saved my ungrateful life. A debt, as they say. And I always pay my debts." He looked at Evie, his smile fading. "Though I reckon this one is going to be more complicated than I thought." He looked back at Ki. "You need to get her out, but Pike wasn't lying. Boone is coming. And the cavalry, this is bigger than you. Ki, it's bigger than her." "What do you mean?" Evie asked, finding her voice. Rafe's pale eyes studied her. He saw the tattered dress, the fine-spun shawl, the moccasins. He saw the exhaustion, and he saw the iron underneath it. "I mean, Malcolm Crane doesn't care about you, little lady. Not really. He doesn't even care about Boone's wounded pride. You were just an excuse." He kicked a log into the fire. Crane wants the land north of Zil, your people's land, he said to Key. He's been trying to get the army to clear it for a year, but the treaty, for what it's worth, is holding. He needed a reason. He needed a scandal. A poor, innocent white woman, carried off by a savage Navajo. An outrage. Something to get the papers in the East screaming. Something to force the army to pacify the territory. Evie felt sick. He planned this. He knew I would run. He hoped you would, Rafe corrected. He put Boone on you, knowing you'd run. He set the trap. You ran into a flood, and you ran into him. He nodded at Key. You turned his little scandal into a real one. Now he's got the cavalry, the bounty hunters, and his own private army all chasing you. He's going to get his war, and he's going to use your rescue as the reason to start it. Key's face was a mask of cold fury. He will fail. He'll fail if he's stopped, Rafe said. Which brings us to my problem. I also have a disagreement with Mr. Crane. He and I had a business arrangement. He double-crossed me. Cost me a great deal of money. I am, as you might imagine, upset. I'd like to hurt him, and I know just how. He looked from Key to Evie, a new, sharp light in his eyes. A bargain, a three-way bargain. I'm hitting his explosives wagon. Tomorrow, it's coming up the Devil's Spine Pass, slow and heavy, full of black powder and dynamite for his new mine shaft. He's got it guarded, but I know a way. You want our help, Key stated. I need your help, Rafe said, all charm gone, replaced by keen-edged business. I have 2 men, good men, but Key, you're not just good, you're a ghost, and you're the best shot in this territory. Help me stop that wagon. Help me send Crane's profit margin to the bottom of a ravine. You do that for me, and I'll pay my debt in full. What is your payment? Key asked. 2 fresh horses. The best I have. Food for a week. And this. Rafe pulled a folded piece of paper from his coat. A map. My map. It shows every patrol, every posse, every bounty hunter's camp between here and the Utah line. It shows the safe trails, the ones your grandfather knew. I'll get you clear. I'll get you north. I have something, Evie said, her voice quiet. All eyes turned to her. She pulled the small, oilskin-wrapped book from her pocket, the one she had taken from the dead bandit. I found this in the wash. It's a ledger. It lists names, payments, but it also lists land, parcels, near Zil. Rafe's eyes widened. He took the book from her, his fingers gentle. He flipped through the muddy pages by the firelight. Well, I will be damned. He whispered, This is Boone's private book. This is the whole plan, the names, the payoffs. This is gold, but he handed it back. It's not enough. It's just a book of names. You need proof he's acting on it. He paused, a slow smile spreading. The wagon, the driver, a man named Silas, is Crane's most trusted mule skinner. He's also his private messenger. He carries a dispatch bag. It never leaves his side. If there's a letter, an order, a connection between Crane and the army, it'll be in that bag. The bargain hung in the air, smoky and dangerous. Evie looked at Key. She saw the storm in his eyes. This was his land, his mountain, his people, being bartered and sold. This was her fault. Key, she said, her voice low but fierce. I am tired of running. That woman in Silver Mercy, the one who climbed out the window, she was just trying to escape. But this is different. He's using me. He's using my name to steal from your people. Just running. It feels like letting him win. I want that bag. I want to choose to stand. Key looked at her for a long time. He saw the woman Shah had seen. He saw the healer, the fighter. Shah was right, he said softly. You have a strong heart, Evelyn Hart. But to stand is to fight. To fight Crane is to invite death. Death has been hunting me since I left Silver Mercy, Evie said, her hand tightening on the ledger. "At least this way. I face it on my feet." Key turned to Rafe Calder. "One day, 2 horses, and the dispatch bag, we will stand. Together." Devil's Spine Pass was a scar scraped into the side of the mountain. It was a 1,000-foot drop on one side and a sheer cliff on the other. The road was barely wide enough for a single wagon. "We don't shoot the men," Rafe said, his voice low. They were hidden in a cluster of rocks, 50 feet above the road. "We don't want to fight. We want chaos. We shoot the rock face, above the trail. Just as the lead wagon makes the turn, we start a slide. That'll stop them. Key, you're the best shot. You won't hit the lead mule. You'll hit the ground in front of it. Spook it. Make it tangle the team. Evie, you stay here with the horses. My men and I will just be lightening the load." They heard the jingle of harnesses before they saw them. The wagon train, 3 heavy freighters pulled by 8 mule teams, groaned into view. The lead wagon, piled high with crates of dynamite, was driven by a burly man. The dispatch bag was on the seat beside him. "Now," Rafe whispered. Key's rifle cracked, the sound echoing, amplified by the canyon. He didn't shoot the mule. He shot the rock just under its nose. Stone chips flew. The lead mule screamed, reared, and tried to bolt, tangling itself and the entire team in a hopeless mess of leather and panic. The wagon train ground to a halt. "Get 'em, boys," Rafe yelled, and he and his 2 men slid down the scree slope, firing into the air. The guards, only 4 of them, were too stunned to react. They fired back, but at shadows. Rafe and his men were not aiming at them. They ran straight for the last wagon, the one piled with barrels of black powder. "Pull the pins!" Rafe roared. But Evie was watching the driver, Silas. In the chaos, he had grabbed the dispatch bag and was trying to cut a single horse from the tangled team. He was going to run. Evie didn't think. She kicked the pinto, the one Key had insisted she ride, and slid down the slope, her shawl flying. She rode not at Silas, but past him, cutting off his escape, placing the pinto directly in his path. "Drop the bag!" she shouted, her voice thin in the open air, but clear. Silas stared, his mouth open, stunned by the sudden appearance of a woman in a dine shawl, riding a Navajo war pony. He hesitated, and that was all Rafe needed. The outlaw appeared from under the wagon, a long-barreled pistol in his hand, which he pressed to the base of Silas's skull. "A wise man," Rafe said, his voice pleasant. "Always does as the lady asks. The bag, now." Silas dropped the bag as if it were on fire. "Heave," Key's voice, a commander's voice. He and Rafe's men were at the side of the last wagon. They had the brake pins out. They were pushing. The heavy wagon groaned, teetered, and then, with a sound of splintering wood, it tipped, it fell, over the side, crashing down the cliff face. A second later, a blossom of fire and black smoke erupted from below. A concussive boom that shook the very mountain. The dynamite in the first wagon, sympathetically, blew. The entire pass was a cloud of smoke, dust, and flying debris. "Time to leave," Rafe yelled. Grabbing the dispatch bag from the dirt, he was on his horse. Key beside him. Evie already wheeling the pinto. They were gone, back up the trail, vanishing into the smoke, before the terrified guards had even figured out who was shooting at them. Miles away, in a sheltered cove, they stopped. Rafe Calder, his face grimed with smoke, was laughing. "Beautiful, beautiful Crane's new shaft is a tomb for at least 2 months. He opened the dispatch bag. He threw the payroll bundles to his men. "Your share." He sifted through the manifests, then pulled out a single, folded letter, sealed with wax. He handed it to Evie. Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal. It was from Malcolm Crane. It was addressed to Captain Marcus Thorne, Fort Mercy. "My dear Captain," it read, "I am grateful for your prompt and decisive action in the matter of the runaway girl. Your cooperation ensures the stability of this territory. As for our agreement, I confirm that the land parcels north of Dzil, as discussed, will be transferred to your name as soon as the area is fully pacified. Your rescue of Miss Hart will be the final justification we need." Evie read it, then read it again. Proof. Hard. Undeniable proof. He was using her. He was using the army. He was using it all to steal Key's home. Rafe Calder looked at the letter in her hand. "Well, Key, my debt is paid, and then some. Here are your horses. The map, Cedar Bluff is north." He mounted his horse, his men beside him. "Your choice, but I'll tell you, a man like Crane, when you blow up his favorite toys, he doesn't run. He comes to kill you." He tipped his hat to Evie. "Ma'am, it's been a pleasure." He was gone. Evie looked at Key. She held the letter. "He's right. He'll come for us, and he'll use this lie to blame your people." Key's face was carved stone. "He already does." "Then running to Cedar Bluff won't stop him," she said, her voice shaking, but not with fear, with rage. It just lets him win. We have to stop him. Key, not just for me, for Dzil." Key looked at the woman before him, the woman who had faced down a gunman, who had helped steal a mountain's worth of explosives, who held the paper that could doom or save his people. He nodded. "Once. To stand is to face him. He will come to Silver Mercy. He will gather his power. Then we go to Silver Mercy. We will stand together." Silver Mercy was a town dressed for a lie. From a ridge a mile south, they watched it. The sun had set, and in the twilight, white paper lanterns had been strung along the main street, from the porch of the saloon to the steps of the assay office. They bobbed in the dusty breeze, their glow a soft, false purity. "He is calling it a celebration," Key said, his voice a low rumble. He lay flat on the rimrock, his eyes fixed on the town. "A rescue. He is making you the prize of a festival." "He's making it a party," Rafe Calder said, his tone one of professional appreciation. He had met them on the trail, a planned rendezvous. His own business with Crane, it seemed, was not quite finished. "He's got the whole town in the street, free whiskey at the Silver Spur. He's building a mob, not a posse." Evie watched the lanterns, her stomach a cold knot. Those were for her, a wedding or a wake with Malcolm Crane. They were likely the same thing. "He's making them all witnesses," she said, her voice quiet. "He wants everyone to see him save me. Then we will give them a different show." Rafe said. He unrolled a crude map of the town he had sketched in the dirt. "Crane has his power in 3 places. His office, on the 2nd floor of the assay building. That's his brain, his warehouse. By the mine entrance, that's his muscle. All his supplies, and the holding pen." He pointed a stick. "Here, behind the smithy. He's been arresting any worker who complains. 12 men, mostly Mexican. Some of your people. Key. He's holding them as hostages against a strike. That's his fist." The plan was desperate, born of necessity. It was a 3-pronged attack. "I will handle the fist," Key said. His face was grim. Rescuing captives. This was a story he knew too well. "I will get those men out. They can be our chaos." "I'll take the muscle," Rafe said, tapping the warehouse. "I have a few items left over from our little adventure on the spine. A small fire, a large explosion. It'll get their attention. It'll pull Boone and his dogs away from the center of town." "That left the brain." All eyes turned to Evie. "His office," she said, her voice steady. "The letter I have is good, but the ledger, the main one, is in his safe, and I need his seal. The one he uses for company business. A letter is just paper. A letter with his official seal is in order." "That is the most dangerous part, Evie," Key said. He was not forbidding her. He was stating a fact. "The office is next to the saloon. It is the center of the party."
"I know,"
she said.
"but I am the only one who can walk in there without a gun being drawn. At least, at first. I am the bride, after all."
She looked down at the tattered remains of her gray dress, now covered by Shah's shawl. "They will not be expecting me to arrive on my own." They moved under the cover of a moonless sky, 3 shadows separating, melting into the larger darkness of the town. Rafe peeled off first, heading toward the mine, his bag heavy. Key moved like a ghost, flowing between the dark spaces, silent on his moccasined feet, a hunting knife in his hand. He was heading for the high-walled pen behind the blacksmith's shop, where 2 of Boone's guards, drunk on Crane's free whiskey, laughed by a small fire. Evie walked alone. She pulled the shawl tight, hiding her face, and moved through the alleyways. She came out onto the main street, 2 blocks from the assay office. The noise was a physical blow. A piano jangled from the saloon. Men were shouting, laughing, their voices thick. White lanterns swayed, casting grotesque, leaping shadows. She saw Boone, his massive frame on the porch of the saloon, a tin cup in his hand, his eyes scanning the crowd. He was waiting. She slipped into the deep shadow of the land office, then darted across a narrow side street and into the alley that ran behind the assay building. The back door was her target. Her father had once done business with Crane, and she had been forced to sit in this office, quiet as a mouse. While the men talked, she knew the layout. She knew the back stairs, the ones Crane used so he would not have to walk through the common room. The lock was old. The paring knife she still carried was useless, but a piece of stray wire from a broken barrel hoop, worked by her cold, shaking fingers, was enough. The latch clicked. She was inside. The building was quiet. The noise from the street a dull roar. The air smelled of stale cigars, ink, and something else, a faint, cloying scent. Lilac water. She climbed the stairs, her moccasins making no sound on the wooden treads. The second floor was dark. Crane's office was at the front, its windows overlooking the street. A line of light shone from under the door. He was in there. No, he was in the saloon, playing the generous host. She had seen him. Someone else was in his office. She drew back, her heart a cold, heavy thing. She could not go on. This was insane. But the image of Key, of his face when Rafe spoke of Crane stealing Zill, rose in her mind. To stand is to fight. She took a breath. She needed the ledger. She needed the seal. She walked to the door. She did not knock. She opened it. The man at the desk was not Malcolm Crane. He was standing, his back to her, looking out the window at the street below. A glass of whiskey in his hand. He was tall, and he wore a black frock coat, pristine and severe. "It is a pathetic display, is it not?" he said, his voice calm, cultured. He had not turned. Such a waste of good lanterns for such a brutal purpose. Evie's blood turned to ice. She knew that voice. It was the voice that had hollowed her out, the voice that had told her she was worthless, sinful, and weak. He turned. His face was just as she remembered, thin, ascetic, with pale eyes that saw only the flaws in others. It was her stepfather, the preacher. "Evelyn," he said. He did not seem surprised. "You have caused a great deal of trouble. I must say, I am disappointed." "What? What are you doing here?" she whispered, her hands clenched in the folds of her shawl. "My work, of course," he said, gesturing to the chair. "Mr. Crane is a practical man, but he lacks finesse. He digs for copper. I broker the deals that make it profitable. The land titles, the military contracts, the political favors. Someone must ensure the smooth progress of civilization." You work for him," she said, the realization a sickening blow. "The man who destroyed my father." "Your father destroyed himself," the preacher said, his voice sharp, the old cruelty returning. "He was a weak man. Evelyn, he did not understand the nature of the world. Mr. Crane does.
And I do.
He looked at her, at the shawl, the moccasins. And clearly, you do not. You have run from a respectable, powerful man into the arms of a savage. You have traded a house for a mud hut. You have shamed your name. You have shamed me.
I have no name you gave me,
she said, her voice shaking, but a new, hot anger burning away the cold. You will, he snapped. You will end this foolishness. You will go downstairs. You will tell Mr. Crane you were lost. You were frightened. You were taken. You will beg his forgiveness. You will marry Boone. It is the only way to save your honor, to restore the order you have broken. He was her final cage, the one made of piety and shame.
No, she said.
No, he laughed, a dry, cold sound.
Evelyn, you have no choice. You think that Indian can protect you. He is a relic. He is a ghost. Out there.
He pointed to the street. Out there is the world. It is a world of men like Crane and Boone. My world. You will do as I say.
I am not her,
Evie said, her voice growing stronger. She walked past him, to the desk. She saw the safe, open. He had been in it, and on the desk, beside a stack of papers, was the heavy brass seal. She picked it up. She picked up the thick, bound ledger next to it. What do you think you are doing? He demanded, his voice rising, his composure cracking.
You work for Crane,
she said, turning to face him, the heavy book in her hands. You talk of honor. You who sold me. You who brokered the deal to steal the land of the people who saved me. You know nothing, he hissed, his face pale, his mask of control gone. He lunged for her, his hand raised, not as a father, but as an owner. You will obey me. Evie did not flinch. She did not raise a hand. She simply stood, holding the book. No, I will not ever again. He stopped, his hand in the air, his face contorted, and in that moment, he heard it too. A shout, a gunshot, close, then another. Key had reached the pen. The two guards, drunk and slow, were no match for him. He moved from the darkness, a blade, a shadow. He did not kill them, but they would not be waking for a long time. He broke the lock on the gate. Go, he yelled in Spanish and Dine. Outrun, take your freedom. The dozen men, confused, then enraged, poured out of the pen. They were miners, laborers, and they were angry. They grabbed shovels from the smithy, hammers, pieces of iron. A new chaotic force was loose in Silver Mercy.
Boone, on the saloon porch, heard the shouts. He saw the men, his prisoners, running free, led by a single, tall figure. It's him, he roared. The Navajo, get him! He leaped from the porch, his pistol in his hand, his men spilling out behind him. The street, moments before a party, became a battlefield. Key was not trying to fight. He was trying to escape, to draw the fire, to get his new unarmed army to safety. He pushed two of the miners into an alley. Go hide. Key, a voice yelled. A young Dine man, one he recognized from the Hogans, was frozen in the middle of the street, transfixed by the terror of Boone bearing down on him. Boone raised his pistol, taking careful aim, the white lanterns illuminating his target. Key moved. He shoved the young man, pushing him to the ground, and took the bullet himself. It hit him high in the shoulder, a brutal, staggering blow that spun him around and threw him against the wall of the land office. He slid to the ground, his rifle clattering on the boardwalk. Evie saw it from the window. She screamed. The preacher, his face a mask of fury, grabbed her arm. You see, this is the chaos you have caused. You are coming with me, now. He dragged her, pulling her from the office, down the stairs, and out the back door. Just as the first tongues of flame licked the sky from the far end of town. Rafe's diversion. The warehouse exploded. It was not a single boom.
It was a rolling, deafening roar, a volcano of fire and light that sent burning timbers 100 feet into the air. The ground shook. The white lanterns on the street danced and tore free. The windows of the saloon shattered, showering the street in glass.
The crowd, the mob, stopped.
They looked from the firefight in the street to the inferno at the mine.
They were trapped between two wars.
Boone, his pistol smoking, stared in disbelief at the pillar of fire. His men, Crane's men, looked at the warehouse, their supplies, their pay, going up in smoke. Their loyalty, paid in whiskey and silver, began to evaporate. A rain of hot ash began to fall, coating the street, coating the people, turning the white lanterns gray. "He's lying," a man shouted from the crowd. "That ain't no rescue. That's our wages. Crane's been lying to us." The preacher did not care. He had Evie by the arm, dragging her through the chaos of the alley, away from the fight. "You will be saved, Evelyn. You will be purified."
"Let her go."
They both stopped. Key was leaning in the mouth of the alley, one hand pressed to his shoulder, his face pale, his shirt a black, wet stain. But he was standing, and his other hand held his knife. "You are finished," the preacher hissed.
"Look, the law is here."
A bugle call, clear and sharp, cut through the din. At the far end of the street, a column of cavalry, 2 abreast, was trotting toward them, their sabers drawn, their blue uniforms stark in the light of the burning warehouse. "Halt!" the captain, Thorne, yelled. "Halt, in the name of the United States Army. Lay down your arms, all of you. You are all under arrest."
Boone, his face black with rage and soot, looked at the soldiers.
Key, bleeding,
looked at them. The miners, their brief rebellion over, dropped their tools.
The preacher smiled. He released Evie's arm, his composure restored. He held his hands up, a martyr. "Thank God, Captain," he called out. "You are in time. You have saved us from this savage and this poor, deluded girl." The soldiers surrounded them, their horses nervous, their rifles leveled. They were not rescuing. They were occupying. The system, the ultimate antagonist, had arrived, and it was pointing its guns at everyone. The world had shrunk to the sound of Key's ragged breathing and the scrape of their boots on stone. They had not run. They had melted, while Rafe Calder created a diversion. A noisy, false trail of 2 horses heading east. He and Evie had slipped into a dry culvert, moving west, back toward the high, broken country. Key had led them, his body fueled by a lifetime of knowing the land. But Evie had supported him, her shoulder under his good arm, feeling the heat of his fevered skin. They found shelter in a place that was not a place, a deep cleft in the rock, hidden by a fall of ancient boulders, a space barely large enough for 2 people and a night's worth of fear. Evie lowered him to the ground. Key slumped against the stone, his face pale, his eyes closed, his hand still clamped to the bloody ruin of his shoulder. The chaos of Silver Mercy, the fire, the soldiers, the accusing face of her stepfather, all of it crashed down on Evie. She was exhausted, a bone-deep weariness that went beyond muscle. She was shaking, the adrenaline fading, leaving her cold and empty. She slid down the rock wall opposite him, her body giving up. Her dress, the tattered gray cotton, was her enemy. It was caked in mud, stiff with dried blood, and stank of smoke and the flash flood. It was the skin of her old life, and it would not let her go. As she slumped, the torn hem of the skirt, weighted with silt, snagged on a sharp, thorny bush growing from a crack in the rock. It pulled tight, a final, spiteful tether. Evie gave a small, broken cry, a sound of pure frustration. She was too tired to even be free of a dead plant. She pulled, but the fabric was strong and the thorns were sharp. She was, once again, trapped. Key's eyes opened. He had been watching her, his gaze heavy, clouded with pain. He saw her struggle, the pathetic, final snag. It was the microcosm of her entire life. He pushed himself forward, his teeth grit against the fire in his shoulder. He moved in front of her. He did not ask. He did not speak. He gripped the handful of ruined fabric that was tangled in the thorns. It was the last piece of her cage, and the Navajo warrior ripped her dress. He tore the fabric with his one good hand, a single, clean, violent sound that echoed in the tiny space. The cloth gave way, not with the sound of cotton, but with the sound of a shackle breaking. Evie gasped. The breath was torn from her. It was not a sound of fear. It was a sound of release, a painful, sudden, absolute liberation. The tension that had held her body rigid since she climbed from her window in Silver Mercy snapped. She looked at the torn fabric, then at him, and the words came. Not from her mind, but from her soul. A whisper, a command, a prayer. "Devour me." He froze, his hand still full of the gray cloth. His eyes met hers. She was not speaking to him. She was speaking to the world, to the fire, to the man who had just set her free. It was an incantation. "Devour this," she whispered, her hand gesturing to the dress, to herself, to the past. All of it. Leave nothing untouched. Leave nothing, nothing unclaimed. She meant the opposite of what the words implied. Leave nothing for the past to claim. Leave nothing for Crane. Leave nothing for her stepfather. Consume the old life, the old fear, the old shame. Burn it, eat it. Leave no trace of the victim, so that the woman could be born. Key understood. He did not read her words. He read her soul. He held her gaze, and in his eyes, she saw the same hunger. Not for her, but for a new world. For a life where things were not just taken. The spell broke. The high, dangerous emotion settled. He was still a man, bleeding in the dirt. "Your shoulder," she said, her voice dropping, becoming practical, the healer's voice she had found in Shah's Hogan. "You are bleeding. I need to see it." She moved toward him, her own exhaustion forgotten, replaced by a clear, sharp purpose. He did not resist. He leaned his head back against the stone, his face tight with pain, as she gently, firmly, pushed the torn, bloody fabric of his shirt away from the wound. It was bad. The bullet had gone through, but it had torn the muscle. It was dark, angry, and it was still weeping blood. "It needs to be cleaned," she said, "and packed. We have to stop the bleeding." She had Shah's moss. She had clean strips of her own petticoat, the one she had saved. She had the last of the water in her canteen. She set to work. Her hands, which had trembled as she picked the lock, were now steady. Her touch was firm. "This will hurt," she said, echoing Shah. "It is not the first," he ground out, his body rigid as she cleaned the wound with the water. She worked in silence, the only sounds the rasp of his breathing, the soft click of her canteen, the tear of the cloth. She was close, her head bent, the smell of juniper and smoke from her shawl mingling with the metallic tang of his blood. In this small, dark space, they were the only two people in the world. "I am sorry," she said, her voice low. "You took this bullet for me, for one of my people." He was silent for so long she thought he would not answer. "I did not take it for you," he said finally, his voice rough. "Or for the boy. I took it because I will not watch them take any more. From anyone." He opened his eyes. They were dark with a pain that went deeper than the wound. I lost my wife, years ago, to the soldiers, to their order. I did not fight. I watched. I did nothing." His voice broke. Just for a second, a fissure in the stone. "I have been afraid to feel that again. Affinity. It is a wound that does not heal." Evie stopped, her hands still. She looked at his face, at the confession laid bare. "I know," she whispered.
I know that fear. She went back to packing the wound with the soft, healing moss. My stepfather, the preacher, he used to tell me that my body was not my own, that it was a vessel for sin, that it had to be purified, controlled. She did not look at him. She looked at her hands, at the work. I was so afraid of being touched, of being owned. When Crane said I would marry Boone, it was not a marriage. It was a branding. She had finished. She tied the bandage, a thick, white strip of her past, to staunch his wound. Her hand lingered, just for a moment, on his skin. It was hot. "You are not owned," he said, his voice quiet. He covered her hand with his good one. His skin was rough, calloused, but his touch was light. It was not a touch that took, it was a touch that affirmed. "And you," she said, meeting his gaze. "You did not fail her. You are here. You fought." They looked at each other, two survivors, their deepest wounds exposed in the dark, the fear of loss, the fear of ownership. He moved his hand, his good hand, from hers and placed it, palm flat, over his own heart, a sign, a statement. Evie, understanding, placed her hand over his heart. She could feel the steady, strong beat beneath her palm. It was the rhythm of the land. It was real. Then she placed her other hand over her own heart. Key watched her, then covered her hand with his. They stayed that way for a long moment. No kiss, no embrace, just this, a circle of hands, a circuit of trust, connecting two hearts. It was a promise made in silence. We will protect. We will not possess. We will be partners. This is my heart. This is your heart. They are our own, and we will guard them, together. The moment stretched, became a new, quiet truth. Evie finally pulled back. Her duty as a healer done, her duty as a partner just beginning. The world outside returned. "Rafe," she said, her voice practical again. "He has the ledger, he has the letter, he is going to Cedar Bluff?" Key nodded, his mind clearing, focusing on the tactical. He is drawing the soldiers, and Boone, away from us. He is taking the road. He is the loud noise. We are the silence." "But he will be caught," she said. "Perhaps," Key said. "Rafe Calder is a fox. He knows more than one burrow. He will get the word to the judge. I rebel. He is a hard man, but he is a fair one. He is our only chance." He looked at his wounded shoulder. He looked at their meager supplies. "But we are still trapped. They will find this place, the soldiers. They will not follow Rafe forever. They will circle back. They will hunt me." He pushed himself up, wincing. "I should go. I can draw them. I can lead them on a chase they cannot win. Not until you are safe. You must get to Cedar Bluff. Evie, you are the witness. Your voice. That is the weapon they truly fear." He was offering himself, a sacrifice, the thing she had just seen him bleed for. Evie stood up. She looked at the man who had ripped her dress to free her, who had confessed his deepest fear, who had just put his hand over her heart. And she felt a different kind of rage, a clean, protective fire. "No," she said. He looked at her, confused. "No," she said again, her voice like iron. "I am done with men making sacrifices for me. I am done being the person who is saved. I will not be divided from you. We are not a target and a diversion. We are partners. We go together, or we do not go at all." He stared at her, and in his dark eyes, she saw a slow, dawning light, a warmth that had nothing to do with fever. He saw her, not the victim, not the runaway, the woman. He held up the piece of tattered gray cloth, the piece he had ripped from the bush. Evie took it from him. She walked to the mouth of the cleft, where a small fire, one she had built for light to see his wound, still smoldered. She held the cloth over the flame. It was the dress she had worn when she fled. It was the cage.
It was her stepfather's voice, and Crane's ownership, and Boone's cold eyes. It caught, the fabric blackening, then flaring into a bright, clean orange flame. They both watched it burn. They watched it turn to white ash, which the night breeze took and scattered. The past was gone, devoured. Nothing unclaimed. Cedar Bluff was not a town. It was an argument with the desert, a dusty collection of adobe buildings and horse pens huddled around a muddy spring. But it was the designated place for the circuit court, and today was market day. The entire sparse population of the high plateau seemed to be here. Mules brayed. Dine traders displayed their blankets, and prospectors argued over the price of flour. Presiding over it all, on the warped plank porch of the only general store, sat Judge Ira Bell. He was a man carved from old hickory, tough and unbending, his beard stained with tobacco, and his eyes, over a pair of cheap spectacles, missed nothing. Into this chaos, two figures walked from the desert, a man and a woman. They moved slowly, the man leaning heavily on the woman, his left arm bound in a bloody, makeshift sling. The woman, in a tattered dress and a magnificent, smoke-stained shawl, moved with a grim purpose, her face pale with exhaustion but her eyes burning. They were Key and Evie. They stopped at the edge of the crowd, drawing stares. A man at the front of the crowd saw them. Malcolm Crane. He was dressed in a clean, dark suit, his face composed. Standing next to the preacher, Boone was there too, his arms crossed, a smug, satisfied look on his face. And at the edge of the court, Captain Thorne sat on his horse, his blue uniform a stark symbol of authority. Crane saw them, and his face lit with a terrible, false relief. He pointed a thick finger. Judge Bell, thank God you are here there, the savage and his captive. You have arrived in time to see justice done. The crowd turned, a sea of faces, murmuring, hostile. Judge Bell slammed his gavel, a simple wooden mallet, on the railing. Order, I will have order, Mr. Crane. You will state your business, and you will state it with facts, not with pulpit thunder. Facts, sir, Crane said, stepping forward, his voice ringing with false sincerity. The facts are these. That woman, Evelyn Hart, my ward, was brutally kidnapped from a mail coach by that savage. He pointed at Key. He murdered my men. He destroyed my property. He burned my warehouse to the ground, a loss of thousands of dollars. And he held her captive, against her will, in the wilderness. It's true, Judge, Boone yelled, stepping forward, playing his part. I was her fiancé. I tracked them. I tried to save her. He shot at me. He led a riot of convicts. He is a murderer. Then the preacher. He stepped forward, his hands clasped, his face a mask of sorrowful piety. Your Honor, I am her stepfather, her only living guardian, the girl. She is not well. She has been through a terrible ordeal. She is deluded, confused. She has been bewitched by this heathen. She is not responsible for her words or actions. I beg the court, return her to my care. She must be taken away, healed, her soul cleansed of this darkness. He had framed her. She was not a witness. She was a madwoman, a victim, an object. Key tensed, ready to speak, but Evie put her hand on his good arm. Not yet, she whispered. Well now. A voice drawled from the side of the porch, a voice that was lazy and sharp at the same time. That is a whole wagon load of horse manure. Rafe Calder stepped from the shadow of the store's awning. He was clean, his hat brushed, and he was holding a leather satchel. He tipped his hat to Judge Bell. Judge, my apologies for interrupting. My name is Rafe Calder. I'm just a traveler, but I happened to find some mail that Mr. Crane seems to have lost. Crane's face went white. Order, Judge Bell barked. his eyes sharp, fixed on Rafe. "You will approach the bench, Mr. Calder, and you will explain yourself." "With pleasure," Rafe said. He walked up the steps, opened his satchel, and laid out his evidence. The scorched ledger book, and the letter, sealed with Crane's own wax. "It seems, Judge, that Mr. Crane here is not the victim. He's the man pulling the strings." Judge Bell put on his spectacles. He read the letter from Crane to Captain Thorne. The silence on the porch stretched. The judge's face, already hard, seemed to turn to granite. He read the letter, his lips moving silently. Then he read it again. He slowly folded it. He took off his spectacles. He looked up, not at Crane, but at the cavalry officer on his horse. "Captain Thorne," the judge said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You will dismount. You will stand before this court." Thorne, his face pale, hesitated. "Judge, I'm here to maintain—" "You are here, sir, as a party to conspiracy, bribery, and the attempted theft of federal trust land." Bell snapped. "Now, you will dismount." Thorne swung off his horse, his authority, his very uniform, seeming to shrink. "And now," the judge said, turning his cold eyes back to the crowd, "I believe Miss Hart has been waiting to speak." Evie stepped forward. Key was beside her, a silent, bleeding guardian. She was not the same woman who had fled Silver Mercy. Her voice was not loud, but it was clear, and it cut through the murmuring of the crowd like a knife. "My name is Evelyn Hart," she said, her eyes on Judge Bell. "I was not kidnapped." A gasp went through the crowd. "I was not deluded," she said, her gaze shifting to her stepfather, who flinched as if struck. "And I was not bewitched." She told her story. Her voice did not shake. She spoke of her father's death, of the debt. She spoke of the forced marriage to Boone, a man who had never been her fiancé, but her jailer. "I ran, Your Honor," she said. "I chose to leave. I chose freedom. I was on the mail coach when Mr. Crane's men, the men who he sent, attacked it to bring me back." She told them of the flood. She told them how Ki Yazi, who had been tracking his own stolen property, had saved her life. She told them how Boone and his men had hunted them, not to rescue, but to kill. "He poisoned the springs, Your Honor," she said. "He set a trap for us in the canyon, and when we went to Silver Mercy, it was not to burn it, it was to find the proof." She pointed to the letter in the judge's hand. "Proof that Mr. Crane, my stepfather, and Captain Thorne conspired to use my abduction as an excuse to send the army onto Dineland, an excuse to steal that land, his sacred mountain, for a copper mine." "She is lying," Crane roared, his face purple. She's in love with the savage. She's a—" "Es verdad," a voice, raw and angry, shouted from the back. The crowd parted. The miners, the dozen men Key had freed, stepped forward. They were gaunt, angry, their clothes in rags. One of them, a tall man with a fierce mustache, pointed a shaking finger at Crane. That one, he speaks the truth," he said in broken English. "Crane, he locked us in a cage. We asked for our pay. He called us thieves. Boone's men, they were going to hang us." He turned and pointed to Key. "That man, the Navajo. He saved us. He fought for us. He took a bullet for us." The story had flipped. The crowd was no longer a paid mob. They were a jury, and they had just heard the truth. The murmurs turned to growls. They looked at Crane, not as a boss, but as a liar. Boone saw it. He saw his world, his power, his brute force control, dissolving in the dust. He saw Evie, standing tall, no longer his property, but his accuser. He saw Key, wounded, but victorious. He saw the judge,
his face a mask of cold judgment. He saw the miners. He saw the pistol in Captain Thorne's holster, just feet away. He was a mine foreman. He solved problems with explosions. You lying whore!" Boone screamed, his face a mask of pure rage. He lunged, not for Thorne's gun, but for his own, the one still in his belt. He was not aiming at the crowd. He was aiming at Key. It was pure, desperate instinct. Key saw the move. He was wounded, slow, but his instinct was faster. Judge Bell was right next to him. Key didn't think. He shoved. His one good arm, a solid, powerful thrust, sent the judge toppling backward off the porch, out of the line of fire, landing in a heap in the dust. Boone fired. The bullet, meant for Key's heart, sang through the air where the judge had been, splintering the porch rail. The crowd screamed, panicked, surging, trying to run. Boone, his face a snarl, was fumbling, trying to re-aim, to finish the job. His gun coming around to the fallen, exposed Key. He never saw Evie move. She had been standing by Key, her hand on his belt, supporting him as he fell, shoving the judge. His pistol, the one Rafe had given him, was there, her hand, which had been in her shawl, closed around the grip. She did not think. She did not plan. She did not feel. She acted. Boone was raising his gun for the second shot. Evie pulled the pistol from Key's belt, raised it with both hands, the weight of it immense. And she screamed, "No!" Boone's head snapped up. He saw her, his gun, her gun, his face, for one brief, terrible second, was a mask of pure surprise. She pulled the trigger. The explosion was deafening, shocking, an end. Boone stared. He looked down at his chest. A small, dark flower was blooming on his shirt. He looked back at her. He did not curse. He did not speak. He simply fell, heavy as a sack of ore, face first into the dust. A dead silence fell. The crowd, the soldiers, everyone was frozen. Evie stood, the heavy pistol smoking in her shaking hands. Then the spell broke. Malcolm Crane stared at Boone's body, at his dead enforcer, his dead plan, his eyes wide with terror. Looked at the crowd, the miners, the townspeople. He saw no friends. He saw only the rage he had sowed. "Get him!" a man yelled. "Liar," another. "Thief." The crowd surged. They were not a lynch mob. They were an instrument of justice, raw and swift. They did not hang him. They did not beat him. They bound him, with the rope from his own general store, his hands, his feet, leaving him trussed in the dust next to the man he had employed. Judge Ira Bell, furious, got to his feet. He picked up his gavel and slammed it on the porch railing. "Order, order in this court." He dusted himself off. He looked at the bound Crane. "Malcolm Crane, you are in the custody of this court, to be transported for federal trial, for fraud, conspiracy, bribery, and murder." He turned to the pale, trembling Captain Thorne. "Captain, you are relieved of command. You are under arrest. Lieutenant," he barked at the soldier next to him, "take your captain's sidearm." The lieutenant, his face grim, did as he was told. The system was eating its own. Finally, the judge looked at Evie. She had dropped the pistol, as if it were on fire. Key was at her side, his good hand finding hers. Holding it, the judge's hard eyes softened. Just for a moment, he looked at the body of Boone. "The court," he said, his voice loud for all to hear, "finds that this action was in the clear and justifiable defense of this court, and of a life." Evie stood, shaking, the world tilting. Key's hand was her anchor. She looked at the crowd. They were all staring at her. The rescued miners, the townsfolk, the soldiers. She was the object, the prize, the center. She took a breath. She stood straight, pulling Shah's shawl, her banner, around her shoulders. Her voice was not strong, but it was clear, and it carried over the silent, dusty court. "My name is Evelyn Hart," she said. "I am not a prize. I am not a savage's captive, and I am not a bride to be rescued." She looked at the body of Boone, then at the bound form of Crane. "My freedom," she said, her voice finding its strength, "is not the spoil of any man." The dust of the courtroom settled, but the silence that followed was heavier. Death had come, swift and brutal, and the aftermath was a quiet, stunned accounting. Judge Bell, his authority now absolute, oversaw it all. Boone's body was removed, wrapped in a canvas tarp from the general store. He was a murderer, a bully, and a dead man. He was planted in the hard-pan soil of the burial hill behind the town, without ceremony, without a cross. His passing marked only by the grim efficiency of the soldiers who dug the grave. The other men, the bandits from the flash flood, were long gone, claimed by the arroyo. But Key, his face pale and drawn, his wounded shoulder a throbbing agony, did not let the day end with only a white man's burial. That evening, as the sun set and the air grew cold, he stood at the edge of town, facing Zill. He built no fire. He simply stood, his good hand holding a pinch of sacred corn pollen he had carried in a small pouch. He let the pollen fall to the wind, a quiet, personal ritual, not of forgiveness, but of release. It was a farewell for the spirits of all who had died in this conflict, dine and white alike, a recognition that the earth, at least, must be given peace. The living had more complex needs. The miners Key had freed were the first order of business. Judge Bell, his makeshift court now convened inside the store, sat at a table, the captured ledger book and Crane's letter before him. He listened, one by one, as the men, their voices raw with remembered fear and newfound courage, told of their contracts, their confinement, their stolen wages. Judge Bell's ruling was swift. All labor contracts signed under duress by Malcolm Crane are hereby declared null and void. The assets of the Crane Mining Company are seized by this court, pending federal review. Back wages will be paid from the company's accounts. A ripple of disbelief, then a wave of stunned, joyous relief passed through the men. They were free. Their lives, stolen by ink and intimidation, were their own again. Silver Mercy, the town built on fear, had its foundation ripped out. With Crane gone, a prisoner bound for a Prescott jail, with Boone in the ground, and with the military's corruption exposed, the town's entire power structure had vaporized. The news of the warehouse explosion, of the trial, of Crane's arrest, had spread like wildfire. The town was not celebrating. It was waking up. People who had lived in silence, afraid of Crane's enforcers, afraid of losing their jobs, began to talk. They began to demand. They were not asking for a new king. They were, for the first time, asking for a town. Evie and Key did not stay to watch. Key needed healing, and Evie needed a place to breathe. Rafe Calder had, as promised, left them the 2 horses, along with his map. He had not waited to say goodbye. Tucked into one of the saddlebags was a folded piece of paper. It was an old IOU, written in Rafe's elegant script, for a debt Key had never expected to be repaid. Scrawled across the bottom, in fresh ink, were 2 words paid in full. They rode out, not north to Cedar Bluff's new life, but south, back to the high rocks, back to the Hogan. The journey was a mirror of their first, but the reflection was changed. Before, they were a captive and a guide, hunted and desperate. Now, they were 2 partners, wounded and weary, moving toward a sanctuary they had earned. Evie tended to Key's shoulder twice a day, cleaning it with water from the springs on Rafe's map, repacking it with the last of Shah's moss. He was fevered, his body fighting the infection, but he never complained. He simply rode, his back straight,
leaning into the pain. When they arrived at the hogan, Shah was waiting at the entrance, as if she had known the precise moment they would crest the ridge. Her gaze was sharp, clinical. She took in Key's gray pallor, the lines of pain around his mouth. She took in Evie, no longer the terrified girl in the ruined dress, but a woman, her face set, her moccasins dusty.
"He is a fool,"
Shah said, her first words, pointing at Key. "He lets the lead into his body, but not the sense into his head."
"It is good to see you too, Aunt,"
Key murmured, a rare, faint smile touching his lips before he swayed in the saddle. They got him inside, onto the sheepskins. For 3 days, Evie and Shah worked as a team. The old woman's knowledge was of the earth poultices of juniper and sage, bitter teas that broke the fever, chants that seemed to soothe the very air in the hogan. Evie's knowledge was from the importance of boiled water, of clean bandages, of forcing broth down a man who did not want to eat. They were a bridge between two worlds, and Key, lying between them, began to heal. During Key's recovery, Evie's restless energy, her need to do, to build, to repay, took over. She could not offer money. She offered what she knew. She had seen the disorganization of the hogan supplies, the way Shah's healing herbs were mixed with her cooking supplies. Evie, the innkeeper's daughter, knew lists. She knew organization. She found a small, dry alcove in the cliff near the hogan. With the help of Shah's grandson, the boy whose breathing she had eased, who now followed her like a shadow, she cleaned it. She built shelves from salvaged wood. She organized Shah's herbs into labeled pots. She took stock of the community's meager medical supplies, a few bandages. Some traded whiskey for cleaning wounds. The salves. She created a small, functional, clean aid station. It was not a clinic, but it was a start. It was a place where healing could be done with order. Shah watched, her dark eyes missing nothing. She said little, but one evening, she brought Evie a cup of hot, sweet tea. "It is a good thing," she said, nodding at the neat shelves. "Order. The Bilagana love their boxes, but sometimes a box is a good place to keep a thing safe." It was the highest praise she could give. When Key was finally strong enough to walk, he and Evie took the horses to a high mesa that overlooked the lands to the north. Zil, the sacred mountain, stood in the distance, its peaks sharp against the sky. They sat, not touching, just sharing the same air, the same view. "I have a job," Evie said into the silence. Key turned to look at her. "Judge Bell," she explained. "Before we left Cedar Bluff, he offered me a position. The man who ran the general store, the one who was in on it with Crane. He is also gone. The store, the freight line, it is in chaos. The judge needs someone who can read, who can write, who can keep a ledger that is not cooked. You will be a storekeeper," he said. It was not a question. "I will be a logistician," she corrected, a small smile touching her lips. "Managing the supplies for the freight line, ordering provisions, and I will be running an aid station, like the one at the hogan, a real one, with medicines from the East." Judge Bell agreed. She would have a small room in the back of the store, a salary, a legal name. She would be Evelyn Hart, manager, a person in her own right. "It is a good life," Key said, his voice neutral. He looked back at the mountain. "It is a safe life. You have earned it." "Yes," she said, but she did not sound as certain as her words, as if the sky had been waiting for that fragile moment. The world changed. The wind, which had been a dry whisper, suddenly picked up, carrying the smell of ozone and wet earth. The clouds, which had been a distant, bruised line on the horizon, had massed. They were dark, heavy, and they were racing toward them. The first drops were fat, cold, striking the red rock with a hiss. Then the sky tore open. It was not a flood. It was a cleansing. It was a deluge of pure, clean water. A rain that was not angry, but absolute. They were soaked in seconds, but neither moved to find shelter. They sat, side by side, and watched the rain come down on Zill. It was a gray sheet, a curtain of water that washed the dust from the air, that turned the red rock a deep, gleaming crimson. The violence was being washed away. The blood was being washed away. The dust of the long trail, the ash of the fire, the grime of the jail, all of it, sluicing away, running in clean, new rivulets down the side of the mountain. Evie turned her face up to the sky, letting the cold water stream down her cheeks, washing away the tears she had not realized she was crying. Key, too, sat unmoving, the water plastering his black hair to his head, his wounded shoulder taking the blessing of the storm. When the rain finally passed, an hour later, the world was new. The air was so clean it was sharp in the lungs. The colors of the desert, the reds, the greens of the juniper, the deep blue of the sky, were vibrant, almost painfully beautiful. They rode back to the hogan, soaked, cold, but clean. That night, Key came to her. She was sitting outside the hogan, wrapped in her shawl, watching the stars, which seemed close enough to touch in the scoured air. He was holding something, a bundle.
"I asked my aunt to make this,"
he said, his voice hesitant, unused to these words. "It was before, when you were healing me." He unrolled it. It was a blanket, woven in the dine style, but the pattern was not traditional. It was a map. It showed the high mesas, the curve of the arroyo, the line of the slot canyon, and in the center, a single, tall mountain. The colors were deep, strong, the red of the rock, the black of the night sky, the white of the stars.
"It is beautiful, Key,"
she whispered, touching the soft wool.
She gave you a shawl for when you choose to be seen,"
he said, his voice low.
This is different. It is not to hide you. It is for when you choose to be warm."
He did not offer it as a gift that demanded thanks, but as a fact, a statement. You have a choice. The choice to be cold, the choice to be warm, the choice to take it, the choice to refuse it. She took the blanket. She wrapped it around her shoulders, over Shah's shawl. It was heavy, and it smelled of the wool, and the fire, and him. "This job in Cedar Bluff," he said, "finally. It is a good safe box, like the one you built for my aunt."
"Yes," Evie said, "it is. I am not a man for boxes, Evie," he said, the words costing him. "My life is the trail. It is Zill. It is the wind."
"I know," she said, her heart aching. This was the goodbye. He turned to her, and his eyes, in the starlight, were as clear and deep as the rain-washed sky. "But I have learned that the trail is lonely and a hogan is cold, even with a fire, when you are the only one in it." He took a breath. "If you stay in Cedar Bluff, I will understand. You will be safe." She looked at him, at this man who had ripped her dress and saved her life, who had confessed his fears and shown her his heart. "Key," she said, her voice soft, but as unbending as the mountain. "You said you were not a man for boxes, and I have lived my entire life in one. My stepfather's, Crane's, that little room behind the store. It is just another one, a safer one, a cleaner one, but it is still a box." She stood up, the heavy blanket held around her.
"I am not afraid anymore, Key, not of being owned, not of being alone, and not of being with you. If I stay in Cedar Bluff, it will not be because I'm afraid to go with you. And if you ask me to go with you, it must not be because you are afraid of being alone."
He understood. This was the final negotiation, the most important one. "I am not asking you to follow me, Evelyn Hart," he said, his voice rough. I am asking if you will walk beside me.
As a partner,
She said. As a partner, he confirmed. She looked at the lights of Cedar Bluff, a faint glow to the north. Then she looked at the great dark shadow of Zill to the south.
I think,
She said,
that I am done with towns, for a while.